Greetings and welcome to Word Magazine. This is Jeff Riddle. I'm the pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. And in this episode of Word Magazine, I'm going to be looking at some writings by David Martyn Lloyd-Jones, in which he was challenging what he called the modern craze for new Bible translations. D. Martyn Lloyd-Jones, or David Martyn Lloyd-Jones, lived from 1899 to 1981, and he's considered one of the great preachers of the 20th century. He was a native of Wales. He was trained as a young man to be a physician, and then he was called into ministry. He was a what was called a Calvinistic Methodist. Seems like a contradiction in terms, but a Calvinistic Methodist, and I think they're also called Welsh Presbyterians. And he served first a church in his homeland of Wales, and then he was called to become the pastor of the Westminster Chapel, right in the heart of London. And he served there from 1939 to 1968. He was there during the war years when London was being bombed in World War II. And he had, by all accounts, a well-known, successful ministry, particularly in preaching and expositional preaching and recovery of the Puritan heritage, reprinting Puritan books, the Banner of Truth ministry, book printing ministry, started with associations from the Westminster Chapel. And then in retirement in 1971, he published what would become a classic book on preaching that was titled Preaching and Preachers. And this was based on a series of lectures that he gave on preaching at Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, I first read this book, I, I think 20 years ago. It may have been 30 years ago that I first read this book. And then at the end of the summer this year in 2025, I picked it up and reread it. You know, it's fun to read a book, and if it's a really good book, it's nice to reread it. And I was talking with on this podcast with my friend Jay Chambers, and he said that he tried to reread Preaching and Preachers once a year. And so I haven't done that, but I did read it a long time ago, and I reread it. And there are so many arresting phrases, aphoristic statements about the preacher and about the act of preaching and about ministry that I started posting on my X account some quotations from the book, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes a couple of paragraphs, sometimes some excerpts. And I've enjoyed doing that, even though I finished reading the book, but I've just been continuing. There were so many that I had underlined or marked at the end of the book that I've just continued to do that. Um, I want to share, though, a couple of pages that I'm planning to read because these were just a little too unwieldy to put in an X post. And I thought it might be interesting to just read these so there would be an audible record of them and then use this as a Word Magazine podcast. And the passages that I'm going to read from Preaching and Preachers and then from another essay that Lloyd-Jones wrote relate to some of his ideas about translations of the Bible, in particular about what he considered to be false or wrong motivations that were being put forward in his day for the promotion of new translations of the Bible. And eventually, he lived in a time where really there was the beginning in the English speaking world of an avalanche of new translations. And one of the rationales was if we have these new translations, then people will be able to better understand the Bible. They'll be more interested in spiritual things. And so there was sort of an evangelistic motivation that was put forward. People can't understand the archaic language, they can't understand these old concepts, and the language needs to be updated. You can just hear echoes of certain modern translation apologists saying we must let the plowboy understand and so forth. But Lloyd Jones gave some pushback to that, and I think it's worth hearing. It was worth hearing when he wrote it in late 60s, early 70s, and it's worth hearing still today. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book. This is the copy that I have. And these comments come in chapter 7 of the book. It's a chapter that's on the congregation. So it's about the hearers. So he has various chapters on different topics. The chapter right before this was on the preacher. And this one is about on the congregation. And again, he's giving pushback to a sort of a simplistic idea that if we only had modern translations, then modern men would be able to read, understand, they would embrace the scriptures. They just can't understand the archaic terms from like the classic English translation, the Authorized Version, which Lloyd-Jones used and promoted. If only men had this updated edition, then they would, understand Christianity and they would embrace it. Um, but again, Lloyd Jones makes the point that really the Bible has always been hard to understand. First of all, for unconverted men, they will not understand the Bible. And also for immature Christians, they will have a hard time understanding the Bible. You can't convey understanding by simplifying and dumbing down the terminology. And really, at the heart of this for Lloyd Jones, his critique is he thinks it's a misplaced emphasis that the problem with understanding, I think, from his perspective, is not necessarily based in the congregation, in the pew, and the listeners, but it's in the preachers. And so there must be competent and compelling preaching. There must be competent and compelling teaching and explaining. And so you can still use the classic English translation, and its content of the Bible can be communicated to hearers as long as there is competent and compelling preaching. So anyway, that's sort of his where he's kind of coming from in this. And this is a kind of an old edition. And so the pagination might not match up if you have a more recent printing of this book. I know a fellow in my church just got a copy of this, and he and I were comparing. He's reading through it, and I was singing its praises. So he got a copy, but he has a newer copy, and our pages don't match up. But anyway, the chapters are still the same. Um, so this is in my uh, printing of it. It's going to start on page 122. So again, his topic is really people who say the problem uh, is that we don't have good hearing and not that we don't have good preaching. And so here's how he approaches this. He says, we must look at some of the ways in which this attitude tends to express itself. It does so in its approach to what we may call the ordinary people. We are told that today they cannot think and follow reasoned statements, that they are so accustomed to the kind of outlook and mentality produced by newspapers, television, and the films that they are incapable of following a reasoned, argued statement. Let me just pause here. So he's saying there were people in his day, in the 1960s, early 70s, saying, oh, we got to change preaching. Not just got to change translations of the Bible, we got to change preaching. We can't have didactic, logical, propositional statements. Probably they were saying we need storytelling, this sort of thing. And so there were people saying, well, listen, people are, they only have a short attention span because of television, because of films, et cetera. And imagine how that sort of idea is now with many people on steroids that we live in now that we live in the internet age, the digital age with social media and YouTube and everything else. But anyway, he's pushing back against that. He continues. Again, the people who are saying we have to change our preaching and our Bibles because of this difference in hearing, basically focusing on the hearing, congregation centered view maybe of preaching. He says these people say we must therefore give them films and film strips and get film stars to speak to them and pop singers to sing to them and give brief addresses and testimonies with just a word of gospel thrown in. Create your atmosphere is the great thing. And then just get a very brief word of gospel in at the end. He continues. Another form which it takes is to say that these people cannot understand the biblical terminology, that to talk about justification and sanctification and glorification is meaningless to them. We must realize that we are living in a post-Christian era and that this is the greatest obstacle to preaching today, that people do not understand our terms. They sound archaic to them. They are not modern. They are not up to date. The result is this great modern craze for new translations of the scriptures in familiar, ordinary, everyday language, and the fashion of no longer addressing God as thee and thou, but you. This, we are told, is all important. That when the modern man hears thee and thou, it is almost impossible for him to listen to the gospel, let alone to believe it. So we have to change our language. And we do this in our new translations of the scriptures and in our prayers and in general in our style of preaching and all our religious activities. That is how this modern attitude, which regards the pew as controlling the pulpit, expresses itself with respect to the ordinary person. Let me pause here for a moment. So he takes special exception with the tendency of modern translations to abandon the old English translation tradition and the Tyndale Authorized Version, Geneva Bible tradition, where especially with respect to addressing the Lord in prayer, that one would use thee and thou, thou being the nominative, thee being the indirect object, um, or the direct object in addressing God, and instead replace that with the common modern usage you, which doesn't make a distinction between you singular or you plural, which doesn't make a distinction as to whether the pronoun is serving as a nominative subject or whether it's serving as an indirect object or a direct object. And so it seems archaic. And so instead of using thee and thou, we have to replace that with the modern you. And we hear this argument all the time, don't we? And Lloyd-Jones, though, is pushing back against this modern, as he puts it, craze for new translations of the scriptures. Let me go on a little bit over to page 130. He continues once again. Let me say at once that I agree entirely that we should always seek the best translations possible. We must not be obscurantists in these matters. Let us have the best that the translators can give us. So, what he's saying is he is not putting any translation on a pedestal, including the Authorized Version. This is a very Protestant confessional viewpoint. The main stress is not on the translation. The translation is only so good as it conveys the meaning of the immediately inspired originals. And so he's not saying that translations are sacrosanct. Martyn Lloyd-Jones was not a KJV onlyist. He says, yes, we should seek the best translations possible. He just thinks that the Authorized Version is the best translation in English, and he's not saying it won't ever perhaps need to be replaced by another translation, but he's saying for our times it is the best translation. And again, he's gonna address also the use of thee and thou as opposed to the modern you. He says, but that is not the real point behind the idea that you must now address God as you rather than thee or thou. If you are to communicate, he puts communicate in quotes, the gospel to the modern man. The basic assumption behind that thinking is that the reason these people do not believe in God and do not pray to him and accept the gospel is the archaic language of the Authorized Version. And if only that is put right, the whole situation will be changed, and the modern man will be able to believe these things. The simple answer to all that is that people have always found this language to be strange. The answer to the argument that people in this post-Christian age do not understand terms like justification, sanctification, and glorification is simply to ask another question. When did people understand them? When did the unbeliever understand this language? The answer is never. These terms are peculiar and special to the gospel. It is our business as preachers to show that our gospel is essentially different and that we are not talking about ordinary matters. We must emphasize the fact that we are talking about something unique and special. We must lead people to expect this, and so we are to assert it. Our business is to teach people the meaning of these terms. They do not decide and determine what is to be preached and how. It is we, talking about preachers, that have the revelation, the message, and we have to make this understood. That was the great principle on which the Protestant reformers worked. That is why they produced their new translations. They wanted the message, as they put it, to be understanded of the people. There is all the difference in the world between the failure of a man to understand Latin and his failure to understand the terms connected with salvation, such as justification. It is always right that the Bible and preaching should be in the native language of any people, but that still leaves untouched the problem of understanding the special terminology of salvation. This is the special business of preaching. We should not expect people to understand these terms. The whole point of preaching is to give them this understanding. And he quotes from 1 Corinthians 2:14. The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. And so, again, he's saying the modern craze for new translations neglects the role of the preacher as the one who interprets and explains. And he mentions theological terms like justification, sanctification, glorification. And I would suppose that in many modern translations, indeed, those biblical terms are likely changed. But he may have also had in mind terms like propitiation that were being replaced in modern Bibles with other terms that were supposedly more meaningful to the contemporary hearers. Um, this issue was also addressed recently in the video on Tyndale, on William Tyndale, that Trinitarian Bible Society put out, in which the persons who were doing presentations, like Matthew Vogan from the Trinitarian Bible Society, were pointing out that when William Tyndale, the first translator of the English Bible from the original Greek New Testament into English, when he made that translation, he wasn't simply trying to dumb down the language. In fact, he invented many terms that wouldn't have been known to people of his day, like Passover and scapegoat. His goal was to faithfully convey the words of the original into English and then rely upon faithful biblical preacher and teachers to make known these terms as they have preached and taught what scapegoat means, what Passover means, what atonement is, etc. Um, that's the excerpt from Preaching and Preachers. And let me just share a couple of other comments that Martyn Lloyd-Jones made at a rally. It was a national Bible rally organized by the Evangelical Alliance at the Royal Albert Hall in London on October 24th of 1961. And it's a little address that it was titled, "How Can We See a Return to the Bible?" And this little article appears in a Banner of Truth book called Knowing the Times, a collection of articles that was printed in 1989. And it's recently been reprinted as a little booklet by Kept Pure Press, Christian McShaffrey. And let me just read a little bit of what he had to say, particularly talking about the value of the authorized version. This is from page 18 of this little booklet. He said, "Very well, my friends, let me say a word for the old book, the old authorized version. It was translated by 54 men, every one of them a great scholar, and published in 1611. And here is another thing to commend it to you. This authorized version came out at a time when the church had not yet divided. I mean by that, she had not yet divided into Anglican and nonconformist. I think there is an advantage in that. They were all still as one, with very few exceptions, when the authorized version was produced." That's interesting. He says one of the values of it is it was before there was a division between Anglicans and dissenting groups in England. So it was providing a common translation for all the Protestant groups at that time. He says another important point to remember is this. The authorized version was produced sometime after that great climactic event, which we call the Protestant Reformation. There had been time by then to see how some of the terrible horrors of Rome, there had been time by then to see some of the terrible horrors of Rome and all she stood for. The early reformers had too much on their plate, as it were. Luther may have left many gaps, but when this translation was produced, there had been time for men to be able to see Rome for what she really was. So he's making the point that it was made uh, not by the men who were at the spear point of the Reformation, but men who had had some time to reflect and see the maturing of the Protestant Reformation. These translators were all men who were orthodox in the faith. They believed that the Bible is the infallible Word of God, and they submitted to it as the final authority, against the spurious claims of Rome, as against the appeals to the church fathers and everything else. Here, I say, were 54 men, scholars and saintly, who were utterly submitted to the book. You have never had that in any other version. Here and here alone, you have a body of men who were absolutely committed to it, who gave themselves to it, who did not want to correct or sit in judgment upon it, whose only concern and desire was to translate it and interpret it for the masses of the people. In view of all this, my argument is that the answer does not lie in producing new translations. They are coming out almost every week, but are they truly aiding the situation? No. And for this reason, men no longer read the Bible, not because they cannot understand its language, but because they do not believe in it. They do not believe in its God. They do not want it. Their problem is not that of language and of terminology. It is the state of the heart. Therefore, what do we do about it? It seems to me there is only one thing to do, the thing that has always been done in the past. We must preach it, and our preaching must be wholly based upon its authority. The authority of the scriptures, the immediately inspired originals, in faithful translations. And so here's Martyn Lloyd-Jones, 1960s, early 1970s, giving pushback to, again, what he called the modern craze for new Bible translations. And it's funny, he was saying at that time in the 1960s, it seemed like there's a new one coming out every week. And if anything, that's only been accelerated. And what's interesting is now we not only have new translations, it seems, coming out every week. Now it seems that we have new modern critical editions of the Greek New Testament of the Hebrew Bible coming out every other week. And so there's this push for constant change, and this undermines stability, this undermines authority. And again, for Lloyd-Jones, he wants to put the onus on the preachers. It is they, the officers of the church, the elders of the church, who have the duty of making clear and known the Holy Scriptures. We can't rely on a new translation to do that. We must rely on faithful, competent, and compelling preaching of the gospel to do that. Well, I'm going to bring this episode to a close. Hope this information has been helpful and is encouraging for those who are listening. I'll look forward to speaking to you in the next episode of Word Magazine. Till then, take care and may the Lord richly bless you.